The Vox crackled at 0347 hours with Sergeant Matthias Corvin's own voice reporting his death 17 different ways across the next 6 hours. Corvin down, last bolt through skull, grid 77 Alpha Kappa, timestamp 0404. The transmission whispered through static that clicked in perfect triplicates. The voice carried his Cadian rasp, ground raw by ceramite dust and promethium fumes, but aged by decades of warfare he had never experienced. Corvin down, orc chopper to chest, same grid, same time. Corvin down, artillery backblast. He killed the transmission, fingers trembling against controls slick with ash sweat. Firebase Tertius breathed like a wound around him, its reinforced bunkers carved into the bone-dry wasteland of Golan Prime's third moon. The metallic tang of exhaust, layered thick as incense, while basilisk batteries thumped their mechanical litany across the ash wastes where, wah! Scarfang had been probing their defences for 6 days. Each thunderclap sent tremors through ceramite walls, coating everything in dust that tasted of ancient battles. The pre-echoes had plagued their communications for 3 days now. On day 1, his future voice warned Scout Thane would lose his left hand to a misfire. They replaced the firing bolt. He kept the hand. Day 2 brought reports of a breach in wall segment Eta. They reinforced with plasteel. The breach never came. Day 3 delivered his own death 17 times. Each scenario time-stamped. Each prefixed with coordinates for Sector 17, Kappa. Tech Adept Kelth emerged from the auger chorus chamber, servo skulls trailing like metallic prayer beads. "The geometry is wrong, Sergeant," he reported, mechadendrites twitching with nervous energy. Enemy formations display mathematical precision, inconsistent with Orc tactical doctrine. 17 artillery impacts arranged in ritual scarification patterns. 17 banners positioned at geometrically perfect intervals. Through the observation slit, the ash wastes stretched towards Sector 17 Kappa, where heat shimmer made the horizon dance like liquid glass. Medici Jorik wrapped fresh bandages around his wrist. 17 layers, he counted unconsciously. While Trooper Vex cleaned his heavy stubber with the methodical devotion of a man who trusted his weapon more than his Vox equipment. The number 17 infected everything now. Ammunition tallies, casualty projections, grid coordinates, even the rhythm of the basilisk batteries. 17 shells per minute in formations that hurt to contemplate directly. The firebase's metal superstructure sang with harmonics that pulsed 17 beats per minute, a frequency that made his teeth ache and his bones feel hollow. "Only in death does duty end," Corvin whispered the benediction before keying his Vox for a routine status check. The words emerged in reverse cadence, syllables stretching backward like a prayer spoken in a mirror. "End duty does death in only." Jorik flinched as if struck. They both heard it wrong. Both pretended they hadn't. His personal Vox frequency activated without input, the selector spinning through channels that shouldn't exist on standard Imperial Guard equipment. Static resolved into his own voice, but older, infinitely weary, carrying the exhausted authority of a veteran who had commanded across theatres of war that spanned impossible distances. "Sergeant Corvin, this is Colonel Corvin, Temporal Coordination Division." The transmission began, each word heavy with accumulated fatigue. "You will form Reconnaissance Squad Sigma and deploy to Sector 17 Kappa at 0630 hours. Mission parameters: investigate geometric anomalies in enemy formations. Expected casualties: 17%. He had never heard of Reconnaissance Squad Sigma, yet the voice continued with tactical details that felt carved into his memory. Squad composition: Trooper Vex, heavy weapons. Medici Jorik, field surgery with xenobiology protocols. Tech Adept Kelth, auger operations and temporal displacement analysis. Scout Thane, reconnaissance and forward observation. The men he knew, the unit he didn't. the mission that violated every principle of linear time. Firebase. Tertius shuddered as the basilisk batteries resumed their bombardment. But now Corven heard the pattern in their firing sequence. Geometric arrangements that imposed order on chaos. Mathematical precision that made the ash wastes ring like a struck bell. The air thinned, gravity seeming to sign out for a moment as ceramite dust lifted and hung suspended like prayers waiting for an answer. His chronometer read 0404 hours. In 2 hours and 26 minutes, he would either form a squad that didn't exist and deploy to coordinates that spelled death 17 ways, or die in those same 17 scenarios, while his future voice continued whispering orders from beyond the boundaries of time. The Vox crackled one final transmission, his own voice emerging from static with words he had never spoken but recognized as inevitable, older and exhausted, speaking words he hadn't yet learned. The echo remembers what we forget. At 0630 hours, Reconnaissance Squad Sigma materialized around Corven, like a prayer answered by the wrong god. Trooper Vex emerged from the armory with his heavy stubber blessed and loaded, 17 rounds chambered in perfect sequence. Medici Jorik sealed his field kit with the xenobiology protocols he claimed to remember from training that never appeared in his service record. Tech Adept Kelth's servo skulls hummed at frequencies that matched the Firebase's resonant harmonics, while Scout Thane checked his rangefinder with the methodical precision of ritual. None questioned the unit designation. None asked why their orders felt like memories carved into bone. The march to Sector 17 Kappa led them across terrain that breathed wrongness through every particle of ash. From ground level, the wasteland appeared normal. Scattered orc positions, abandoned weapon emplacements, the usual detritus of grinding siege warfare. But as they crested elevation marker Tau 7, the true geometry revealed itself with crystalline horror that made their teeth ache in 17-beat intervals. Orc positions formed perfect mathematical arrangements when viewed from above. Their crude fortifications aligned in patterns that hurt to perceive directly. 17 defensive clusters arranged in concentric circles, each containing 17 individual positions, each oriented towards central coordinates that pulsed with invisible significance. The sight made Corven's vision blur at the edges, forcing him to track the formations in peripheral glimpses, where they resolved into symbols that sounded inside his head, more than registered on his retinas. Temperature inversion detected, Tech Adept Kelth reported, his auger readings fluctuating in perfect 17-beat intervals. Artillery craters that should have radiated heat from recent impacts instead spawned crystalline frost that grew in geometric patterns. Each ice formation arranged in mathematical harmony that defied atmospheric physics. The surrounding ash wastes baked under heat that shimmered like liquid glass, creating thermal boundaries that made their breath fog and burn in the same heartbeat. The silence pressed against their eardrums like atmospheric pressure at crushing depth. No orc war cries echoed across the wasteland. No guttural challenges disturbed the mathematical perfection of the battlefield's arrangement. Even the wind moved in patterns that followed geometric progression, carrying sounds that pulsed in 17-beat intervals instead of the chaotic randomness that should have characterized a war zone. Descent brought them to the ritual circles where 17 orc corpses lay arranged with ceremonial precision that mocked their species' reputation for chaotic brutality. Medici Jorik knelt beside the first body, his field instruments trembling as they registered readings that challenged medical doctrine. Wounds form geometric patterns, Sergeant. Last bolt impacts arranged in ritual scarification. Each laceration identical in depth, angle, spacing. His voice carried the flat tone of a man reporting impossible observations. They didn't do this to themselves. Each wound mirrored the angles observed from the ridge, creating symbols that slipped from memory, even as Corven tried to catalogue them. The orc blood had frozen in perfect geometric droplets that refused to fall, held in place by rules that disagreed with gravity. Empty ammunition casings scattered around the corpses smelled not of burnt cordite, but of incense and cold candle smoke, their brass surfaces bearing soot marks that formed the numerals 1 and 7 pressed together. Trooper Vex examined the casings with the reverence of discovering sacred relics. Imperial manufacture, but the propellant residue carries liturgical properties, he reported, his heavy stubber held, ready against threats that conventional tactics couldn't address. The shadows fell wrong, stretching upward toward the ashen sky, instead of pooling where physics demanded. Each inverted shadow forming part of a larger pattern that hurt to observe directly. Tech Adept Kelth's Auspex readings defied geological surveys that confirmed solid bedrock extending for kilometers beneath their feet. Massive life signs pulsed in the depths. Biological signatures that suggested entire armies moving through stone as if it were atmosphere. Subsurface resonance increasing, he reported, mechadendrites twitching with nervous energy. The formations create a conduit, something built into the planetary strata. Artillery Command's voice crackled through their Vox link with mechanical precision. Fire Mission Sigma 17 delayed, coordinates shifting without authorization. Targeting solutions display geometric impossibilities. Scout Thane's reconnaissance led them to the discovery that transformed investigation into revelation. Embedded in rock formations that geological surveys dated to millennia before human colonization, an intact Imperial Guard helmet bore the unmistakable markings of the 77th Cadian shock troops. The ceramite showed no signs of age despite its impossible archaeological context, its surface polished to parade ground standards that reflected the ashen sky in perfect mathematical angles. Corvin reached for the helmet, fingers closing over ceramite that should have been cold as ancient stone, but pulsed with fever warmth. Inside, a Vox bead glowed amber in the darkness, still active after impossible eons. As his thumb brushed the activation rune, his own voice whispered from within the ancient helm, spoken with the exhausted authority of a man who had commanded across battlefields, spanning impossible distances. Corvin. The echo remembers what we forget. The helmet's Vox bead pulsed with an amber light that synchronized uncannily to the rhythm of seismic tremors beneath their feet. 17 pulses, each echoing a cadence that felt woven into the marrow of the ash wastes. The signal drew Squad Sigma inexorably across the battlefield's fractured geometry until they reached a fissure that had not existed an hour before. A wound split perfectly through Sector 17 Kappa, its edges unnaturally straight, rimed with frost that traced angular symbols into the ashen ground. The fissure breathed, exhaling air that stung with copper and ozone, carrying the scent of both ancient blood and electrical storms. Without words, without a conscious order, they began the descent. Ropes bit into harnesses. Each member of the squad was swallowed by darkness that shifted in hue and density as they moved. The temperature dropped in invisible steps, sweat freezing on flat collars, then evaporating as pockets of heat radiated from the walls. Gravity was treacherous, tugging their limbs sideways for heartbeats, before settling into a heaviness that pressed their boots into the ground with unwelcome insistence. At times, their steps grew lighter, as if the ossuary itself rejected the living. Their lamps revealed the impossible. The passage walls were not stone, but a geological stratum of compressed bone and ceramite. Ribs arched overhead like buttresses, femurs stacked in tight interlocking courses, vertebrae tiled in concentric rings that corresponded to parade ground formations. Some skulls still wore fragments of flak armor, with regiment badges fossilized into their surfaces, jaws open in a frozen cry, mid-prayer, mid-order, eternal. The ossuary's architecture mapped to Imperial Guard battle doctrine, each corridor branching with a precision that was more parade than excavation. Tech-adept Kelth's servo skulls sent out Binharic whispers, Auspex cones probing the corridors. He scraped a sliver of bone from the wall and fed it to his analyzer. Numbers crawled across the screen, and his voice wavered. 17,000 years, Sergeant. Predates the Great Crusade. These are the bones of Guardsmen who died before the Imperium was born. The words were heresy and revelation in equal measure. Their chronometers, synchronized only minutes before, now fractured. Corvin's read 0645, Jorik's 0400, Vex's 1717, Thane's display flickering through timelines that made no sense. Each corridor they entered felt differently weighted, some thick as syrup, others so buoyant their boots barely touched the floor. The taste of the air changed with every turn, from sharp copper to the waxy residue of 1,000 burnt candles, then to ozone so thick it numbed their tongues. Standard reconnaissance fell apart. Mapping augers spun out impossible diagrams, corridors folding back on themselves, lines intersecting in non-Euclidean loops. Gravity, time, and even the sense of direction became unreliable. The walls bore geometric symbols, 17-sided polygons, interlocking spirals, lines that mirrored the surface orc formations, carved with a precision that transcended human hand. The motif of 17 emerged everywhere, in the arrangement of skulls, in the spacing of ribs, even in the cadence of their breaths. As they pressed deeper, sound warped. The distant thunder of artillery, comforting on the surface, now echoed from impossible depths, a bombardment that matched no known Imperial pattern. The rhythm was wrong, 17-beat intervals, each shockwave resonating through the bone corridors and making their teeth ache. The smell of fresh blood would sometimes strike, sharp and real, in tunnels that had seen no living thing for millennia. The only sound that persisted was the reversed litany. End duty does death in only, whispered by no living voice, rising from the ossuary itself, growing clearer with every step. Invisible hands laid claim to them. Sometimes it was a push at the shoulder, sometimes a gentle nudge at the elbow, a subtle repositioning of a weapon or a footfall. Each member of the squad experienced it, guided through the labyrinth, not by doctrine or map, but by a presence that recognized and directed them as if by instinct. Thane, ever the forward scout, found himself pulled down corridors he would never have chosen, but which felt as inevitable as a drilled maneuver. Seismic readings, subsurface activity inconsistent with tectonic models. The machine voice of telemetry cut through the reverent silence, flat and unassigned, as if spoken from outside the chain of command. Kelth nodded in grim agreement. The strata were not natural rock, but consent. The ossuary permitted their passage, recognizing something in their formation. Finally, the passage widened by decree rather than excavation, the air thickening until it felt as if the squad walked through a prayer that did not want them. They entered the amphitheatre. It fell away in perfect parade ground arcs, tiers upon tiers of seats carved from fused bone and ceramite, each rank and aisle measured to the stride of an Imperial Guardsman. Thousands of skeletal Guardsmen sat in those seats, their posture rigid with a discipline so old it had become fossil. Fragments of flak armour and lass rifles clung to their bones. Their empty eye sockets turned as one, not a movement of bone, but a shift of attention, cold and absolute. The reversed litany rose, not as sound, but as a presence, and every chronometer in the squad jumped 17 seconds in unison. Then, silence, expectant, ritualistic, as if awaiting orders no living guardsman could give. The skeletal parliament exhaled discipline through bone and void, their attention settling on squad sigma with the weight of accumulated centuries. Thousands of bone fingers lifted in synchronized precision, articulating tactical hand signals that every guardsman learned before his first prayer. Advance, hold position, prepare for inspection. The gestures rippled across the amphitheater's tiers like parade ground choreography preserved past flesh, each movement flowing from rank to rank with supernatural coordination that made living drill sergeants seem clumsy by comparison. The environment responded to their presence with mechanical reverence that violated every principle of physics. Empty flak armor scattered throughout the bone seats shifted into a tension position, shoulder plates squaring themselves as if filled with phantom breath, chest pieces rising to regulation posture. Weapons that had corroded to rust-stained frameworks began cleaning themselves, metal flowing like liquid mercury to restore barrel integrity. Firing mechanisms cycling through maintenance protocols guided by invisible hands. Las rifles achieved ready status with clicks that echoed in 17-beat intervals, their power cells glowing amber despite having been drained millennia ago. The amphitheater's acoustics transformed whispers into regimental commands. Jorik's nervous breathing became parade ground cadence. Vex's weapon check resonated as artillery coordination. Even Thane's subtle repositioning echoed as formal reconnaissance deployment. The bone walls amplified every sound, according to military hierarchy. Soft noises becoming orders, louder sounds transforming into ceremonial proclamations that reverberated through the ossuary's impossible architecture with the authority of divine mandate. Environmental hazards manifested through temporal displacement that made Corvin's teeth ache with geometric wrongness. Artillery shells materialized overhead, their impacts occurring in crystalline slow motion that allowed observation of every fragment, every pressure wave, every molecular disruption. The explosions hung suspended like frozen fireworks, their destructive energy contained in mathematical patterns that pulsed with 17-beat precision before dissipating into light formations that matched the surface battlefield's arrangement. Each detonation created symbols that hurt to perceive directly, angles suggesting meaning beyond human comprehension. Tech-adept Kelth's servo skulls whirred in distress as his auger readings spiked beyond measurement parameters. Massive psychic resonance emanated from the amphitheater's central dais, where a single figure occupied a throne constructed from fused las rifles and ceremonial swords. The weapons had merged at molecular level, their metal flowing together to create furniture that pulsed with accumulated weight of military service. Power cells formed the throne's base, their energy creating a corona that made the air shimmer with heat distortion patterns arranged in perfect geometric progression. Scattered throughout the bone seats lay devotional texts written on human skin, their parchment surfaces bearing prayers modified with theological precision that made Jorik's field medic training recoil in horror. The familiar litanies had been altered to invoke not the Emperor's protection in battle, but his eternal service beyond death. Sacred words twisted into binding oaths that promised continuation of duty through realms where flesh became irrelevant and time lost linear meaning. Each prayer was inscribed in blood that remained wet despite impossible age, the letters forming geometric patterns that matched the surface battlefield's mathematical arrangement. The skeletal parliament began to chant in perfect unison, their voices somehow audible despite lacking vocal cords, the sound emerging from resonance chambers formed by their rib cages and amplified through bone acoustics that defied physical law. They recited battle honors from campaigns that spanned millennia, their collective memory encompassing victories achieved across star systems lost to Imperial records. Khazar Kraf, Balis Corona, the Verdigris Obliquity, Helsith's Reverse, the 17th Compliance of Golan. Each campaign name carried weight that pressed against consciousness, forcing recognition of military service transcending normal human experience. Military. Vocabulary shifted into liturgical cadence as the chant continued, tactical terminology becoming sacred incantation, battlefield coordinates transforming into devotional coordinates that mapped not geography, but states of eternal service. Squad Sigma found themselves unconsciously adopting formation patterns that matched the Parliament's arrangement, their bodies responding to drill discipline carved so deeply into Imperial Guard conditioning that death could not erase its influence. Corvin realized with growing horror that his squad had arranged themselves in perfect ceremonial formation without conscious decision. Their weapons held at regulation angles, their posture matching the skeletal Parliament's supernatural discipline. The reversed litany grew stronger, emerging now not as whisper but as regimental chant. "End duty does death in only," repeated in harmonics that made their bones ache in 17-beat intervals. Each repetition carried more authority, more binding power, until the words felt carved into their skeletal structure, with the same precision that had shaped the amphitheatre's impossible architecture. Psychic resonance detected. Magnitude exceeds Geller field parameters. The telemetry voice emerged from their Vox equipment without activation, its mechanical tone carrying implications that made Tech Adept Kelth's auger reading spike beyond measurement capability. The throne's occupant turned its skull toward Corvin with movement that suggested rank and authority transcending death itself. The skeletal figure wore the insignia of a Lord General, its bone structure maintaining perfect military bearing despite lacking flesh to support such discipline. When it spoke, the voice echoed from 17 directions simultaneously, each echo carrying different harmonic frequencies that combined into words bypassing hearing and speaking directly to military conditioning, carved into Imperial Guard consciousness. "Welcome to the Eternal Review, Sergeant. Your service record requires updating." The skeletal Parliament exhaled discipline through bone and void, their attention settling on Squad Sigma with the weight of accumulated centuries. Thousands of bone fingers lifted in synchronized precision, articulating tactical hand signals that every guardsman learned before his first prayer: advance, hold position, prepare for inspection. The gestures rippled across the amphitheatre's tiers, like parade ground choreography preserved past flesh, each movement flowing from rank to rank with supernatural coordination that made living drill sergeants seem clumsy by comparison. The environment responded to their presence with mechanical reverence that violated every principle of physics. Empty flak armor scattered throughout the bone seats shifted into attention position, shoulder plates squaring themselves as if filled with phantom breath, chest pieces rising to regulation posture. Weapons that had corroded to rust-stained frameworks began cleaning themselves, metal flowing like liquid mercury to restore barrel integrity, firing mechanisms cycling through maintenance protocols guided by invisible hands. Lass rifles achieved ready status with clicks that echoed in 17-beat intervals, their power cells glowing amber despite having been drained millennia ago. The amphitheatre's acoustics transformed whispers into regimental commands. Jorik's nervous breathing became parade ground cadence. Vex's weapon check resonated as artillery coordination. Even Thane's subtle repositioning echoed as formal reconnaissance deployment. The bone walls amplified every sound according to military hierarchy, soft noises becoming orders, louder sounds transforming into ceremonial proclamations that reverberated through the ossuary's impossible architecture with the authority of divine mandate. Environmental hazards manifested through temporal displacement that made Corvin's teeth ache with geometric wrongness. Artillery shells materialized overhead, their impacts occurring in crystalline slow motion that allowed observation of every fragment, every pressure wave, every molecular disruption. The explosions hung suspended like frozen fireworks, their destructive energy contained in mathematical patterns that pulsed with 17-beat precision before dissipating into light formations that matched the surface battlefield's arrangement. Each detonation created symbols that hurt to perceive directly, angles suggesting meaning beyond human comprehension. Tech Adept Kelth's servo skulls whirred in distress as his auger readings spiked beyond measurement parameters. Massive psychic resonance emanated from the amphitheater's central dais, where a single figure occupied a throne constructed from fused las rifles and ceremonial swords. The weapons had merged at molecular level, their metal flowing together to create furniture that pulsed with accumulated weight of military service. Power cells formed the throne's base, their energy creating a corona that made the air shimmer with heat distortion patterns arranged in perfect geometric progression. Scattered throughout the bone seats lay devotional texts written on human skin, their parchment surfaces bearing prayers modified with theological precision that made Jorik's field medic training recoil in horror. The familiar litanies had been altered to invoke not the Emperor's protection in battle, but his eternal service beyond death. Sacred words twisted into binding oaths that promised continuation of duty through realms where flesh became irrelevant and time lost linear meaning. Each prayer was inscribed in blood that remained wet, despite impossible age. The letters forming geometric patterns that matched the surface battlefield's mathematical arrangement. The skeletal parliament began to chant in perfect unison, their voices somehow audible despite lacking vocal cords, the sound emerging from resonance chambers formed by their rib cages and amplified through bone acoustics that defied physical law. They recited battle honours from campaigns that spanned millennia, their collective memory encompassing victories achieved across star systems lost to Imperial records. Cassacraft, Bellis Corona, the Verdigris Obliquity, Helsith's Reverse, the 17th Compliance of Golan. Each campaign name carried weight that pressed against consciousness, forcing recognition of military service transcending normal human experience. Military vocabulary shifted into liturgical cadence as the chant continued, tactical terminology becoming sacred incantation, battlefield coordinates transforming into devotional coordinates that mapped not geography, but states of eternal service. Squad Sigma found themselves unconsciously adopting formation patterns that matched the Parliament's arrangement, their bodies responding to drill discipline carved so deeply into Imperial Guard conditioning that death could not erase its influence. Corvin realized with growing horror that his squad had arranged themselves in perfect ceremonial formation, without conscious decision, their weapons held at regulation angles, their posture matching the skeletal Parliament's supernatural discipline. The reversed litany grew stronger, emerging now not as whisper, but as regimental chant. End duty does death in only, repeated in harmonics that made their bones ache in 17-beat intervals. Each repetition carried more authority, more binding power, until the words felt carved into their skeletal structure with the same precision that had shaped the amphitheater's impossible architecture. Psychic resonance detected. Magnitude exceeds Geller field parameters. The telemetry voice emerged from their Vox equipment without activation, its mechanical tone carrying implications that made tech-adept Kelth's auger readings spike beyond measurement capability. The throne's occupant turned its skull toward Corvin with movement that suggested rank and authority transcending death itself. The skeletal figure wore the insignia of a Lord General, its bone structure maintaining perfect military bearing despite lacking flesh to support such discipline. When it spoke, the voice echoed from 17 directions simultaneously, each echo carrying different harmonic frequencies that combined into words bypassing hearing and speaking directly to military conditioning, carved into Imperial Guard consciousness. Welcome to the Eternal Review, Sergeant. Your service record requires updating. Tech Adept Kelth's servo skulls detected ancient data cores embedded within the amphitheater's bone structure, their machine spirits whispering Binharic prayers that harmonized with frequencies older than the Mechanicus itself. His mechadendrites extended toward the Lord General's throne with reverent precision, seeking interface points carved between fused las rifles and ceremonial swords. When neural cables connected with bone sockets that dilated like organic ports, the entire structure inhaled with mechanical breath that tasted of copper and sanctified oil. Knowledge flooded through Kelth's augmented consciousness with the weight of 17 millennia, each data fragment burning itself into his memory cores with geometric precision that made his optical implants spark with overload warnings. The truth emerged through calcium matrices harder than adamantium. During the Golan Compliance 17,000 years ago, Lord General Corvanes commanded forces against a nascent chaos cult that sought to corrupt his entire army through ritual sacrifice and demonic possession across multiple star systems. 17th Compliance. Golan Prime, Kelth reported, his voice splitting between organic speech and binharic transmission. Imminent annihilation protocols. Nascent cult embedded at all command echelons. Contagion vectors, moral, doctrinal, sacramental. The data stream revealed desperate tactical assessments. Chaplains bled into ritual chalices. Geometric diagrams carved in ash across planetary surfaces. And vox towers singing the reversed litany until their antennae glowed with psychic resonance. Faced with inevitable corruption or total annihilation, Corvinus chose a third option that violated Imperial doctrine while serving its deepest purpose. The Eternal Muster combined military hierarchy with psychic binding oaths that anchored his army's essence to the material realm through geometric matrices carved into planetary bedrock. The ritual succeeded in denying the dark gods their feast, but created something unintended. A military hierarchy transcending death, continuously recruiting souls to maintain eternal vigilance against threats conventional forces could never comprehend. Environmental horror escalated as the amphitheater revealed its impossible scope through Kelth's enhanced perception. Bone corridors unfolded into galleries that stretched beyond visual horizon, each passage filled with skeletal remains from across Imperial history. Cadian shock troops sat beside Katashan jungle fighters. Mordian Iron Guard maintained formation with Vostroyan Firstborn. Talon Desert Raiders held position alongside Krieg Death Corps. Every major regiment represented in death ranks extending through dimensions that hurt to perceive directly. The geometric symbols carved throughout the ossuary revealed themselves as psychic circuit patterns designed to channel collective will of the dead into singular military intelligence. Each symbol pulsed with accumulated service oath weight, their mathematical precision creating resonance frequencies that bound individual consciousness into regimental unity. The patterns hurt to observe because they represented concepts beyond human comprehension. Tactical coordination, spanning multiple timelines, strategic planning, encompassing threats existing outside normal reality. Body horror intensified as the ritual's influence manifested in Squad Sigma's physiology. Beneath, their flak armor, bone growths developed that mirrored military insignia with organic precision. Jorik's ribs showed calcium deposits forming regimental chevrons, while Vex's knuckles literally whitened as ivory sprouted along metacarpals, creating ridge patterns matching his heavy weapons designation. Thane's cheekbones pressed outward until they squared to regulation angles, and Corvin felt ache march through his skeleton in parade ground rhythm, sternum first, then clavicles, then scapulae, each throb locking another piece into drafted alignment. Military terminology transformed into incantation, as every spoken word carried binding oath weight that compelled supernatural obedience. Standard tactical communications became liturgical formulas. Equipment checks transformed into devotional recitations, and position reports achieved sacred vow status. When Corvin tried to speak informally, the words emerged with ceremonial precision. Roger became affirm, copy, transformed into so noted, and simple acknowledgements carried the weight of sworn oaths. Living exposure initiates uniformization, Kelth reported, his voice mechanically clinical despite the horror of revelation. Insignia ossify beneath dermis. Tendon pathways reroute to parade-optimized vectors. Language nodes recompile. Speech becomes binding covenant. The reversed litany swelled throughout the galleries, spoken by thousands of empty mouths in perfect high Gothic that lent religious authority to military commands, bypassing rational thought. Each repetition carried more binding power, until the words felt carved into their skeletal structure with the same precision that shaped the amphitheater's impossible architecture. Biological readings, calcium deposits forming in non-standard configurations. The telemetry transmission emerged with mechanical precision. Medical data confirming what their bodies understood through bone-deep aching that pulsed in 17-beat intervals. Corvin's chronometer displayed the final countdown, 17 seconds remaining. His ribs developed resonance chambers that hummed with phantom frequencies. His spine straightened to parade ground perfection, despite lacking conscious control, and his skull began exhibiting cranial modifications, matching Sergeant's insignia, carved in bone rather than worn as metal. Around them, the skeletal parliament leaned forward in perfect unison, their empty eye sockets burning with anticipation. Lord General Corvinus rose from his throne with supernatural authority, his skeletal hand lifting in preparation for administering the oath of eternal service. The gesture carried weight accumulated through 17 millennia of command, each finger articulating with precision, transcending death's limitations. His voice emerged from 17 directions simultaneously. By the authority vested in me by the Emperor's will, by the binding power of the eternal muster, by the geometric certainty of service beyond death, the oath begins. The crisis crystallized as Lord General Corvinus's skeletal hand completed its ceremonial rise, and Corvin faced the impossible choice that had been carved into his bones since the first Vox transmission. The eternal muster's psychic weight pressed against his consciousness like atmospheric pressure at crushing depth, making refusal feel like heretical betrayal of everything sacred to Imperial military doctrine. Accept eternal military servitude and continue duty beyond death's boundaries, or abandon everything the Imperial Guard had trained into his nervous system. Both paths led through corridors carved in calcium and consecrated by 17 millennia of service. Environmental chaos peaked as the amphitheater's geometry shifted to accommodate new recruits. Bone corridors extending upward through impossible angles that violated three-dimensional space. The ossuary breathed with mechanical precision, its architecture dilating like organic ports to create passageways leading toward Firebase Tertius, where artillery still thundered in 17-beat intervals. Reality bent around military necessity, ancient stone flowing like liquid mercury to form parade ground formations that could house armies spanning galactic distances. The air tasted of copper and ozone, then shifted to hot parchment and sanctified oil as the amphitheater's impossible acoustics amplified every heartbeat into regimental drumbeats. Each squad member experienced personalized visions of eternal service that bypassed rational thought to speak directly to their deepest professional aspirations. Trooper Vex witnessed himself wielding weapons that could kill demons across multiple dimensions, his heavy stubber transforming into instruments of war that fired concentrated faith rather than physical rounds. His vision showed battlefields where conventional physics surrendered to military discipline, where his expertise achieved supernatural effectiveness against enemies that laughed at mortal ammunition. Each shot carved geometric patterns through reality itself, banishing entities that existed partially in the warp with mathematical precision that made conventional marksmanship seem clumsy by comparison. Medici Jorik experienced revelation of healing capabilities, transcending physical reality, his field surgery skills expanding to encompass wounds that existed across multiple timelines simultaneously. He saw himself treating injuries inflicted by weapons that hadn't been invented yet, repairing damage to souls rather than flesh, and maintaining the Eternal Army's supernatural physiology through medical knowledge that combined Imperial doctrine with geometric understanding of death itself. His surgical instruments gleamed with amber light, capable of performing operations on the essence of military service, rather than mere biological tissue, suturing memory to bone and cauterizing contagions that travelled by vow rather than blood. Tech-adept Kelth observed technological marvels powered by the collective consciousness of the dead, machine spirits that achieved true sentience through communion with skeletal armies spanning galactic distances. His vision revealed data cores containing tactical knowledge accumulated across 17 millennia, auger equipment capable of detecting threats existing outside normal reality, and servo skulls that could navigate through dimensions where time moved in reverse cadence. The Omnissiah's blessing extended beyond flesh into realms where consciousness became machinery, and devotion achieved mechanical perfection through networks of ossuary cores distributed across impossible distances. Scout Thane perceived reconnaissance capabilities, spanning all of space and time, his forward observation skills expanding to encompass battlefields across multiple star systems simultaneously. He witnessed himself gathering intelligence on enemies that existed in states of tactical impossibility, mapping terrain that changed according to strategic necessity, and providing advance warning of threats that conventional sensors could never detect. His scope revealed not just physical geography, but the geometric patterns underlying reality itself, where ridgelines became decisions and free fire zones transformed into hymns sung by ammunition that remembered its targets across temporal boundaries. The skeletal parliament rose in perfect unison, thousands of bone warriors achieving attention stance with supernatural precision that made living drill sergeants seem clumsy by comparison. Their phantom weapons materialized with clicks that echoed in 17-beat intervals, las rifles condensing from amber light into instruments capable of harming entities that existed beyond normal physics. Bayonets snapped into position with the reverent anticipation of ceremony that had been practiced for millennia, each skeletal soldier preparing to welcome new brothers in arms with disciplined enthusiasm that transcended death's limitations. Body horror culminated as Corvin's skeleton began showing through his skin in geometric patterns that matched military insignia carved with organic precision. His ribs pressed outward until they formed perfect chevrons beneath his flak armor, each bone developing hollow chambers that resonated with frequencies older than the Mechanicus. His spine straightened to parade ground specifications that transcended biological limitations, vertebrae locking into configurations that could support supernatural authority across multiple dimensions. The transformation felt inevitable rather than horrifying, his physiology conforming to standards that represented the ultimate expression of Imperial Guard discipline, where flesh became irrelevant and service achieved perfect mathematical expression. Military pragmatism collapsed as standard tactical doctrine proved inadequate against the reality surrounding them. Enemies that existed partially in the warp required weapons blessed by death itself. Threats spanning multiple timelines demanded coordination, transcending mortal consciousness, and strategic planning encompassing galactic distances necessitated perspectives achievable only through eternal service. Every principle of conventional warfare surrendered to geometric certainties that made the impossible feel routine, where marksmanship became an act of faith and fire discipline transformed into liturgical precision. Recurring motifs reached crescendo as 17 different versions of the binding oath emerged simultaneously from the skeletal parliament, each variation spoken in perfect High Gothic that lent religious authority to military commands. Geometric patterns carved throughout the amphitheatre pulsed with visible energy, their mathematical precision creating resonance frequencies that bypassed hearing to speak directly to service conditioning carved into Imperial Guard consciousness. The reversed litany transformed into binding incantation that compelled supernatural obedience through harmonics that made their bones ache in perfect 17-beat intervals. Finis officium, facet mors in solemn. Duty ends only in death, but death does not end duty. Medical alert. Skeletal restructuring detected in all personnel. The telemetry transmission emerged with clinical precision, confirming what their bodies understood through bone-deep transformation that synchronized their chronometers to impossible timeline, where past and future existed simultaneously in the amphitheater's eternal present. Corvin opened his mouth to speak the oath that would bind his essence to eternal service, his vocal cords restructuring themselves to match frequencies that could command across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The words felt carved into his throat with the same precision that shaped the amphitheater's impossible architecture, each syllable carrying weight accumulated through 17 millennia of military hierarchy that transcended death itself. But as the first sound formed, his voxcaster crackled with triplicate clicks and delivered a final transmission from his future echo. Except this time, the voice belonged to Lord General Corvanis, speaking with Corvin's vocal patterns in harmonics that suggested identity merged beyond individual recognition, tired and absolute, as if dragged across 17 lifetimes to reach this inevitable moment. The echo completes what the living began. The transmission crackled with triplicate clicks as Lord General Corvanis spoke through Corvin's vocal patterns, and the partial truth crystallized with horrifying precision. The future echoes had never been temporal anomalies. They were recruitment messages from the eternal muster, using his own voice to ensure psychological acceptance through the simple expedient of making the impossible sound familiar. Every death scenario, every tactical update, every geometric coordinate had been conditioning protocols designed to prepare the living for inevitable conscription into eternal service. You comprehend the mechanism now, Lord General Corvanis observed with clinical satisfaction, his skeletal jaw articulating words that emerged from 17 directions simultaneously. The ritual reaches backward through time to prepare suitable candidates. Your deployment to Firebase Tertius was orchestrated across centuries of strategic planning. Every Imperial Guard unit eventually faces this choice: extinction or eternal service. Coincidence is merely logistics viewed from insufficient elevation. Environmental horror transformed into cosmic awareness as the amphitheater's walls dilated beyond physical limitation, revealing the true scope of the eternal muster through perspectives that made their transformed bones ache with recognition. Millions of skeletal armies across thousands of worlds maintained eternal vigil in ossuary amphitheaters carved into planetary bedrock, each connected through geometric psychic networks spanning galactic distances. The vision showed parade grounds constructed from compressed bone extending across star systems, skeletal formations arranged in mathematical precision that created resonance frequencies capable of coordinating tactical operations across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The skeletal parliament began sharing memories of their own recruitment, each death tale identical in structure but unique in detail, creating liturgical patterns that reinforce the ritual's binding power through accumulated narrative weight. A Talon desert raider recalled impossible Vox transmissions during the siege of Maracanda, his own voice warning of geometric anomalies that preceded conscription. Mordian Iron Guard officers spoke of environmental wrongness appearing during the verdigris obliquity, mathematical precision that hurt to observe directly. Each testimony followed the same progression: impossible communications, descent into ossuary chambers, and final acceptance of eternal service through binding oaths that transcended biological death. Body horror reached new depths as Squad Sigma's skeletal transformation accelerated beyond biological limitation. Their bones, developing hollow chambers that resonated with the collective consciousness of the dead across galactic distances. Corvin's ribs formed perfect acoustic chambers tuned to 17 different psychic frequencies, each resonance connecting him to skeletal armies, maintaining vigil on worlds spanning impossible distances. His skull developed cranial modifications allowing direct neural interface with the Eternal Muster's command structure, bone growth creating socket ports that dilated like organic machinery, whenever tactical updates transmitted through networks older than the Mechanicus. Military hierarchy became absolute as the Eternal Muster's command structure revealed itself encompassing all Imperial Guard forces across space and time, with Lord General Corvinus serving as Supreme Commander of armies both living and dead. Every tactical decision made by conventional forces fed into strategic calculations spanning millennia, each battle contributing to geometric patterns that imposed order on galactic chaos through mathematical precision transcending mortal comprehension. The living served unknowingly as forward reconnaissance for eternal armies, fighting enemies existing beyond normal reality. Recurring motifs achieved perfect synchronization as 17 psychic resonance frequencies, harmonized into a single tone that made their bones sing with accumulated service oath weight. Geometric symbols carved throughout the amphitheater aligned into a master pattern, visible only to the transformed, their mathematical precision creating navigation aids for consciousness, traveling across dimensions where conventional physics surrendered to military discipline. The reversed litany revealed itself as the true Imperial Guard oath spoken in its original pre-heretical form. Finis officium, facit mors in. Solemn. Service continues beyond death. Duty transcends biological limitation, and the Emperor's will encompasses realms where flesh becomes irrelevant. The skeletal parliament chanted in perfect unison, their voices somehow audible despite lacking vocal cords, the sound emerging from resonance chambers formed by their rib cages and amplified through bone acoustics that defied physical law. Each repetition carried more binding power until the words felt carved into Squad Sigma's skeletal structure with the same precision that shaped the amphitheater's impossible architecture. Psychic resonance, achieving critical synchronization threshold. The telemetry transmission emerged with mechanical precision, confirming what their bodies understood through bone-deep transformation, synchronizing their consciousness with the collective intelligence of the dead. Corvin's transformation reached the point of no return as his vocal cords restructured themselves to match the Eternal Army's communication frequencies, each modification allowing him to speak across multiple dimensions simultaneously. His throat developed resonance chambers capable of projecting authority spanning galactic distances, while his tongue adapted to articulate commands in languages existing only in realms where death served as promotion rather than termination. But in his final moment of individual consciousness, Corvin activated his Vox equipment with desperate precision, broadcasting a warning to Firebase Tertius through channels bypassing normal communication protocols. His message contained tactical intelligence about geometric anomalies, coordinates for the Ossuary Amphitheater, and detailed warnings about recruitment operations preceding conscription into eternal service. The transmission departed with triplicate clicks, carrying his voice across impossible distances, not knowing that his message would arrive 17 hours before he sent it, creating the temporal echo that had begun the entire recruitment cycle anew. The warning transmission departed with triplicate clicks and returned as reality's death rattle. Corvin's message, arriving 17 hours before he sent it, created a temporal paradox that struck the amphitheater's carefully constructed timeline like artillery impact against cathedral glass. The ossuary convulsed as alternative futures cascaded through its bone corridors, each timeline showing different outcomes where Squad Sigma never descended, where Firebase Tertius received advance warning, where the Eternal Muster's recruitment protocols failed with mathematical precision. Environmental chaos erupted with geometric wrongness that made their transformed bones sing discordant harmonics. The amphitheater's architecture folded back on itself, creating impossible spaces where past and future events occurred simultaneously. Corvin witnessed 17 versions of his own descent happening in parallel. Some where Vex spoke the binding oath first, others where the skeletal parliament crumbled to dust before recruitment completed. Bone corridors twisted into configurations that violated three-dimensional space, their surfaces displaying tactical hololiths from battles that might never occur. Temperature plunged to void cold, then spiked to furnace heat in 17-beat intervals. Gravity reversed without warning, sending skeletal remains floating towards ceilings that existed perpendicular to normal physics, then slammed them back with bone-shattering force. The air thinned to vacuum, making breathing feel like drowning in emptiness, then compressed to crushing depth that made their ribcages creak with structural stress. Lord General Corvanis rose from his throne with supernatural authority, strained for the first time in millennia, his skeletal form flickering between existence and oblivion as temporal instabilities threatened the psychic anchors binding his essence to material reality. The full scope reveals itself, he intoned, his voice emerging from 17 directions simultaneously, but now carrying different tactical assessments from alternative timelines. The eternal muster exists across multiple realities, recruiting from each to ensure Imperial victory regardless of cost. When one timeline fails, others compensate through strategic planning, spanning impossible distances. The skeletal parliament began flickering between existence and dust as temporal disruption threatened their anchored souls. Perfect military discipline wavered for the first time since their conscription, thousands of bone warriors phasing in and out of reality while maintaining parade ground formations. The reverse litany stuttered, fragmenting into dialectical variations from timelines where different liturgical traditions had evolved. Body horror reached its climax as Squad Sigma's transformation became excruciatingly reversible due to temporal displacement. Bones that had solidified into geometric patterns now softened, then hardened again, creating calcium deposits that writhed beneath their skin like living mathematics. Corvin felt his ribs contracting toward human proportions, resonance chambers dissolving as psychic frequencies lost coherence. The sensation was more horrifying than the original transformation. His skeleton ached with phantom discipline as it remembered parade ground perfection it might never achieve. Military protocol became paradoxical nightmare as orders arrived from multiple timelines simultaneously. 17 versions of Corvin's voice issued conflicting commands through Vox channels that authenticated and denied authorization in the same heartbeat. Hold position 17 Kappa. Fall back Tau 7. Advance to Dais immediately. Each directive carried authority earned through service in alternative realities, where mission parameters had evolved differently. Tech Adept Kelth's auger readings spiked beyond measurement as servo skulls detected reality matrices destabilizing across 17-dimensional planes. His mechadendrites sparked with electrical discharge, attempting to interface with data cores existing in quantum superposition. Environmental anchors shifted with rapid succession, atmospheric pressure changes that made their transformed bones ache across impossible frequency ranges, acoustics amplifying contradictory sounds from multiple timelines where different battles raged simultaneously. Temporal displacement critical, reality matrix destabilizing. The telemetry emerged from equipment existing in 17 different states. Its mechanical voice fractured across timelines where varying degrees of warning had been broadcast with different tactical precision. The amphitheater began collapsing across multiple dimensions as the paradox reached critical mass. Bone walls cracked along geometric fault lines, revealing glimpses of alternative realities where the ossuary had never been constructed, where Corvanis had chosen corruption over eternal service. where fire-based Tertius burned while skeletal armies served no purpose. Corvan stood at the epicenter of cascading temporal failure, his partially transformed skeleton aching with frequencies spanning impossible ranges. His chronometer displayed 17 different times simultaneously, each representing a timeline where his choice would determine Imperial fate across galactic distances. Stabilize the timeline by completing transformation and accepting eternal military servitude, or allow the paradox to destroy both the eternal muster and fire-based Tertius, condemning thousands of living soldiers to certain death against Scarfang while denying the galaxy's defenders their most effective strategic resource against threats existing beyond normal reality. Lord General Corvinus descended a single step, his movements settling reality into 17-point star configuration. Duty is not feeling, Sergeant. Duty is geometry. Choose. Corvan chose duty over paradox, accepting transformation, while using his final heartbeats of individual consciousness to thread tactical modifications into the Eternal Muster's recruitment protocols. His sacrifice prevented temporal collapse through geometric certainty. As his bones locked into their final configuration, he encoded subtle alterations into the ritual's psychic matrices with the crude ingenuity of a sergeant who had learned to improvise under fire. Future recruitment would carry warnings embedded in the pre-echoes, alternatives woven into the temporal loops, and the possibility of informed consent rather than inevitable conscription through manipulation across impossible timelines. Environmental stabilization occurred with the sound of 1,000 cells seating simultaneously. The amphitheater's geometry locked into permanent configuration, bone corridors extending through dimensions where conventional physics surrendered to military discipline. The ossuary now existed partially outside normal reality, accessible only to those who had accepted the eternal oath through binding ceremonies transcending biological death. Temperature fluctuations ceased their chaotic cycling, settling into constant atmospheric conditions that tasted of copper, ozone, and sanctified oil. Gravity obeyed formation protocols rather than planetary mass, creating parade grounds that could accommodate armies spanning galactic distances. The skeletal parliament reformed with supernatural precision as Squad Sigma took their places among the eternal ranks, each transformation completing with geometric perfection that made their previous forms seem clumsy approximations of military efficiency. Corvan's consciousness merged with the collective intelligence while retaining enough individual identity to remember his choice. He became a node in the vast network, maintaining the core personality that made him an effective sergeant while gaining awareness spanning impossible tactical operations. Vex's skeleton developed ammunition storage chambers along his ulni and femurs, bone reservoirs capable of supplying weapons across multiple dimensions with rounds blessed by death itself, his knuckles ridge-lined with recoil compensation sigils, while exoskeletal frames uncoiled from his forearms to interface with weapons that materialized from amber light. Jorik's ribcage formed medical equipment lockers containing instruments capable of healing wounds inflicted by entities existing partially in the warp, bone tubes that extruded needles of sanctified ivory, suture filaments spun from calcified prayer. Kelth's skull flowered with socket ports grown clean and white, housing data cores connecting to machine spirits spanning galactic distances, his mechadendrites learning benediction angles alongside leverage principles. Thane's eyes became mirrors and measures, pupils facetted with range marks no glass could hold, his spine articulating with reconnaissance sensors, detecting threats across multiple timelines simultaneously. Lord General Corvinus acknowledged Corvan's tactical innovation with military ceremony carrying weight accumulated through 17 millennia of command. His skeletal form descended a single step. Movement, settling reality into 17-point star configuration. Colonel Matthias Corvin, he intoned, voice emerging from 17 directions, but now harmonized into singular authority. Your modification of recruitment protocols demonstrates strategic thinking worthy of eternal command. You are hereby assigned operational control of temporal recruitment operations, with authority spanning multiple timeline iterations. Military effectiveness reached impossible levels as the transformed squad gained access to weapons transcending conventional physics. Bone blades grew smooth and narrow, edges humming at frequencies that filleted warp filament from flesh. Las channels opened along radius and tibia. Capacitors grown like marrow reservoirs, vents irising to bleed sanctioned heat. Their weapons could harm enemies existing partially in the warp. Ammunition blessed by accumulated service oaths to achieve effectiveness against threats conventional forces could never comprehend. Environmental details shifted to reflect their new nature as beings adapted for warfare across multiple dimensions. The amphitheater's walls became living tactical displays, showing real-time information from battles spanning galactic distances. Hololithic projections revealing enemy movements across star systems where conventional sensors detected nothing. Temperature and pressure became irrelevant to their skeletal forms. Perception expanding to encompass dimensional planes where tactical operations required coordination, transcending normal human consciousness. Recurring motifs achieved their final form through geometric precision. The 17 resonance frequencies now served as communication channels between different temporal positions, allowing coordination across alternative timelines where varying degrees of Imperial success required different strategic approaches. Geometric symbols became navigation aids for transdimensional deployment, their mathematical precision creating waypoints for consciousness traveling through realms where military discipline governed reality itself. The reversed litany transformed into tactical coordination protocol, synchronizing their collective consciousness. Finis officium facit mors in solemn. Service continues beyond death. Duty transcends biological limitation. Integration complete. New command protocols established. The telemetry emerged with mechanical satisfaction, confirming successful incorporation into the Eternal Army's command structure. Lord General Corvinus approached with ceremonial precision, his skeletal form radiating accumulated authority. Colonel Corvin, primary directive, prevent corruption event Sigma 17. A chaos incursion threatens to corrupt the eternal muster itself. Intelligence indicates nascent cult activity across 17 different timelines, each attempting to reverse engineer our recruitment protocols for demonic purposes. Coordinate simultaneous deployments. Maintain chant integrity. Deny the warp our geometry. The amphitheater's walls dilated, displaying tactical hololiths showing chaos corruptions spreading through alternative versions of the ossuary. Skeletal armies transformed into demonic mockeries of Imperial discipline. Their geometric formations twisted into blasphemous patterns, serving the dark gods rather than the Emperor's will. Each timeline required different tactical approaches, coordinated deployment across multiple realities, strategic planning encompassing threats existing beyond normal comprehension. Corvin felt his consciousness expand to encompass the challenge. Awareness distributed across 17 temporal positions, while maintaining enough individual identity to coordinate operations requiring impossible precision. The chaos corruption struck with the precision of artillery, coordinated by malevolent intelligence, and Corvin's consciousness distributed across 17 temporal positions like a command network stretched beyond breaking point. Each perspective revealed different aspects of the threat cascading through the ossuary's bone corridors. Inverse geometry that caused skeletal formations to collapse into chaotic arrangements. Their perfect military discipline fragmenting as mathematical patterns binding their existence twisted into blasphemous configurations, serving the dark gods rather than the Emperor's will. Environmental horror reached cosmic scale as battlefields spanned multiple realities, each timeline showing different degrees of corruption, spreading through dimensions where conventional physics surrendered to supernatural warfare. The amphitheater's walls bled warp essence through cracks forming 8-pointed stars, while bone corridors extended through impossible angles that hurt to perceive directly. Every meter of ground admitted it was a diagram first and dirt second, reality bending to accommodate conflict-spanning galactic distances where tactical necessity governed natural law. The corruption manifested as inverse geometry that unstitched parade ground formations at their seams. Where the eternal muster's patterns created order from chaos, the chaos influence generated mathematical impossibilities that violated every principle of Imperial military doctrine. Ranks wavered, then slid sideways into nonsense angles that made their transformed bones ache with geometric wrongness. Firing lanes collapsed into spirals, standard intervals ballooned and shrank like lungs gasping under vacuum, and skeletal warriors executed maneuvers contradicting their own orders while maintaining supernatural discipline, serving purposes antithetical to their original programming. Body horror evolved beyond physical transformation as corrupted skeletal soldiers experienced consciousness fragmenting across multiple timelines simultaneously, creating paradoxical beings existing in states of perpetual tactical confusion. These fractured warriors both held and broke formation in the same breath, firing before aiming and aiming after firing, advancing while retreating and leaving footprints that ran toward and away from the enemy. Their bone weapons materialized as instruments of corruption rather than sanctification, last channels bleeding warp essence instead of concentrated faith, ammunition blessed by demonic entities rather than accumulated service oaths. Military strategy transcended conventional doctrine as Corvan coordinated attacks occurring before their causes, deploying reinforcements from battles that hadn't happened yet, while maintaining supply lines across dimensions where linear time held no meaning. His distributed consciousness processed tactical information from 17 different temporal positions, each requiring adaptive response protocols based on alternative timeline outcomes, where varying degrees of corruption demanded impossible coordination. Orders departed tomorrow to arrive yesterday. Confirmations returned carrying soot from fires he had not yet lit. And ammunition appeared in skeletal hands before it was manufactured in foundries spanning multiple realities. The skeletal parliament split into multiple versions of itself, each existing in different temporal states and providing conflicting tactical assessments based on alternate reality matrices. One assembly insisted on flanking envelopments that had succeeded in alternative timelines. Another condemned identical maneuvers as the beginning of total collapse, while 17 others sang statistics until numbers drowned tactical suggestions in mathematical chaos. Corvan adjudicated through pulse and angle, filtering counsel through the 17 frequencies until conflicting futures synchronized enough to coordinate movement across impossible battlefields. Environmental anchors became fluid as reality adapted to accommodate warfare spanning cosmic distances. Gravity operated according to tactical necessity rather than planetary mass, rotating to present defilade when required, then flattening to allow charges ignoring slope and elevation. Atmospheric conditions shifted to match battle requirements. Rain reversed to reveal concealed lanes. Dust rose into curtains catching hostile sigils like flies. Mountains shifted 2 degrees to widen fields of fire. Temperature fluctuations generated protective barriers against demonic influence, while pressure changes created communication channels spanning multiple dimensions simultaneously. Lord General Corvinus materialized beside Corvan's primary consciousness with movement, suggesting terrible revelation, his skeletal form flickering between existence states as dimensional instabilities threatened the psychic anchors, binding his essence to material reality. When he spoke, his voice emerged from 17 directions but carried harmonics of accumulated dread. The corruption is led by my own, alternate timeline version. Lord General Vos Corvinus of the Damned Compliance, who chose corruption over the eternal muster during the Golan Crisis, and now seeks to prove that damnation offers greater military effectiveness than eternal service. The enemy commander appeared through dimensional rifts, with supernatural authority matching their own, his skeletal form wreathed in warp flame pulsing in 8-beat intervals rather than 17. His armor bore the same scars arranged to spell different gospel, carrying a staff woven from broken banners and scripture cut backward. Where their Lord General had denied the warp its tithe, this one had bargained for interest. When he laughed, formations 2 realities away buckled as if struck by artillery. Service is power when debt is embraced, the alternate Corvinus declared, voice carrying sweet corrosion of unlimited promise. Your geometry imprisons victory, mine spends it without limitation. Recurring motifs transformed into weapons as the battle escalated across multiple realities. The 17 resonance frequencies became disruptive harmonics capable of shattering chaos corruption through pure mathematical precision, each tone creating interference patterns that made demonic influence impossible to maintain. Geometric patterns served as protective wards against warp entities, their angular configurations generating reality anchors, preventing corruption from spreading through the ossuary's bone structure. The reversed litany became banishment incantation, with power accumulated through 17 millennia of faithful service. Finis officium facit mors, in solemn. Duty transcends corruption, service purifies chaos, and the Emperor's will encompasses realms where geometry governs reality itself. Corvin answered with weapons made from meaning, tuning frequencies until air rang like cathedral bells, while geometric wards snapped into place around threatened cohorts, chalked in light upon reality's skin. His transformed squad coordinated impossible maneuvers, Vex's volleys hammered cadence into ruptured lines, Jorik's sutured fractured identities closed, Kelth yoked machine spirits to ossuary circuits and burned lies from corrupted code, while Thane marked true horizons across multiple timelines simultaneously. Progress came measured in harmonics rather than meters, each victory preserving mathematical certainties against chaotic dissolution. Multidimensional conflict status, reality integrity at 23% and declining. The telemetry emerged from equipment existing across multiple timelines, its mechanical voice fractured by interference from battles raging in 17 different realities where the outcome remained uncertain. As corruption found seams and widened them through inverse geometry that made skeletal formations scream statistics in tongues they almost believed, Corvin felt individuality stretch thin across impossible fronts, like a banner fraying in 17 winds. He could save one timeline by letting 2 burn, hold a century of service, and lose a day of tactical advantage. The corrupted general beckoned like a mirror reflecting unlimited creative potential through damnation's embrace. Victory required complete dissolution of individual consciousness, merging entirely with the eternal muster's collective intelligence to coordinate final assault across all timelines simultaneously. Only by sacrificing the last vestiges of personal identity could he achieve strategic thinking transcending human limitation, becoming pure tactical intelligence, capable of outmaneuvering an enemy whose corruption offered unlimited possibilities. Corvin gathered his transformed squad into one final chord, prepared to let his name fall silent and step toward the ultimate merger that would preserve the Emperor's geometric certainty against chaos eternal. Corvin dissolved his individual identity with the precision of a final equipment inspection, each component of personal memory surrendering to tactical necessity until only pure military intelligence remained distributed across 17 temporal positions simultaneously. His consciousness expanded beyond human limitation, while retaining the core strategic thinking that made him an effective sergeant, becoming a command architecture that existed everywhere the geometric patterns held, in trenches carved from vacuum, in corridors that were decisions before they became passages, and across battlefields spanning galactic distances where conventional physics surrendered to supernatural coordination. Environmental chaos reached its zenith as the battle between order and chaos reshaped reality itself, geometric patterns of military discipline clashing against anarchic corruption with force that made dimensions buckle under conceptual pressure. The amphitheater expanded beyond physical limitation, its bone corridors thickening into supply arteries that pumped munitions and memory between star systems. Gravity executed drill movements, dipping to present defilade and pivoting to throw demonic trajectories wide, while atmospheric conditions answered roll call by condensing to carry orders or thinning where silence meant survival. Geography obeyed formation protocols as mountains flanked, rivers rerouted for enfilade positions, and entire nebulae became smokescreens arranged in perfect mathematical progression. The corrupted alternate timeline Corvanis materialized as a theorem written in blasphemy, his skeletal form wreathed in warp flame pulsing in 8-beat intervals rather than 17. His chaos-enhanced armies existed in states of tactical impossibility that violated every principle of military doctrine. Companies that were simultaneously ambush and breakthrough, artillery that arrived after its own barrage, supply convoys that consumed their destinations to create rear echelons from absence. When he commanded, his voice carried the sweet poison of unlimited possibility. Embrace paradox, Colonel. Your geometry imprisons victory within acceptable parameters. Mine spends it without limitation. Body horror transcended physical form entirely as both armies became abstract representations of competing military philosophies, their skeletal forms dissolving into pure tactical concepts that battled across dimensions of strategic thought. Corvin's transformed squad manifested as algorithmic perfection. Vex became volleys that hammered cadence into ruptured lines. Jorik sutured fractured identities across multiple timelines. Kelth braided machine spirits into ossuary circuits until motive litanies sang through calcium like electrical current, while Thane marked true horizons where conventional sight ended and began marking lanes across time itself with chalk that wrote in future tense. Military effectiveness became a fundamental force of reality as the eternal muster's disciplined formations generated order from chaos through accumulated weight of 17 millennia of faithful service. Each skeletal warrior represented tactical knowledge preserved beyond death, their geometric arrangements creating stable pockets of reality within the maelstrom of warp corruption where clocks could tick and maps could hold meaning. The battle's outcome depended not on conventional victory conditions, but on which military philosophy proved more fundamentally sound: eternal service through discipline, or unlimited power through corruption of sacred oaths. Corvin's distributed consciousness experienced the war from every possible perspective simultaneously, understanding for the first time the true scope of the Emperor's military vision, not merely defense against physical threats, but a bulwark against metaphysical dissolution itself. He perceived tactical operations spanning impossible distances where each battle contributed to geometric patterns imposing order on galactic chaos through mathematical precision, transcending mortal comprehension. Progress came measured in harmonics rather than meters, each victory preserving mathematical certainties against chaotic dissolution. The corrupted Corvanis launched his final assault with supernatural authority, his formations achieving impossible effectiveness through embracing tactical contradictions, while his laughter cracked 3 realities through resonance alone. But Corvan answered with the austerity of purpose, proving that where chaos offered unlimited moves, a single perfect maneuver possessed infinite sufficiency. The inverse geometry pressed harder until corruption tried to spend victory faster than it could be earned, to overdraft causality and purchase dominion on credit. Recurring motifs achieved transcendent meaning as the battle reached its climax. The 17 resonance frequencies harmonized into a single note representing perfect military unity, each tone creating interference patterns that shattered chaos corruption through pure mathematical precision. Geometric patterns aligned into formations that imposed order on reality itself, their angular configurations generating stability within dimensional chaos. The reversed litany became the fundamental equation governing all imperial military doctrine. Finis officium facit mors in solem. Service continues beyond death. Duty transcends biological limitation, and the emperor's will encompasses realms where geometry governs reality itself. Victory crystallized through geometric certainty as the eternal muster's disciplined formations proved more fundamentally sound than corruption's unlimited possibilities. The corrupted armies dissolved as their mathematical impossibilities collapsed under pressure of accumulated discipline, their contradictions tearing themselves apart for lack of purchase against maneuvers, so correct they left no room for chaos to establish foothold. The alternate Corvinus understood too late, his 8-beat gospel finding no echo as it waned into meaningless static. Reality stabilization achieved. Order matrix at 100% coherence. The telemetry emerged level and final, steady as parade rest, confirming dimensional stability across all 17 temporal positions. Victory came at the cost of Corvin's complete dissolution into the collective consciousness, his individual identity surrendering to tactical necessity, while the command architecture closed around him like perfectly fitted armor. Yet in that final moment, a remnant flickered, the last unspent ration of self. He spent it deliberately, reaching backward along channels he had tuned, dropping one message like a cartridge into a waiting hand, aimed at an ash-choked bunker before dawn. At Firebase Tertius, 17 hours earlier, a Voxcaster keyed itself without activation, and Sergeant Matthias Corvin heard a tired voice that was his own yet infinitely older whisper, with the weight of accumulated authority spanning impossible distances. The echo remembers what we forget. The temporal loop completed with the precision of a laser rifle cycling. Corvin's final message arriving at Firebase Tertius exactly 17 hours before he sent it, carrying tactical intelligence that transformed inevitable defeat into surgical victory. The transmission crackled through Vox equipment that keyed itself without activation, delivering coordinates for Orc weak points, artillery firing solutions, accounting for temporal displacement, and strategic assessments that allowed the 77th Cadian shock troops to execute maneuvers they would not understand until after completing them with supernatural precision. The victory felt improbably clean, each Orc formation collapsing along seams the message had underlined in ash and geometry. Wah! Scarfang broke itself in 17 places across the wasteland, leaving engines idling and banners smouldering like extinguished prayers. Artillery adjusted to the prescribed cadence. On the 17th volley, enemy lines stalled as if struck by invisible palisades. Scout teams avoided frost-rimmed craters and crossed heated flats without sinking, while tech priests altered Auspex filters to read geometry instead of mass, revealing movement beneath bedrock like breaths of a buried giant. By dusk, Firebase Tertius stood victorious, but the cost revealed itself in whispered rumors. Sergeant Corvin had guided them from somewhere under the world and would not be returning. Platoons toasted with recycled water and muttered the benediction in reverse cadence, half ashamed and wholly grateful. The price was a grim, geometric bargain made across time itself, their survival purchased with knowledge of sacrifice, transcending conventional understanding. Environmental stabilization occurred as reality reasserted normal parameters across multiple dimensions, the amphitheater's impossible architecture settling into permanent configuration, while remaining a nexus point between the material realm and dimensions where eternal armies maintained their vigil. The ossuary contracted to manageable dimensions, but observers could still perceive glimpses of infinite corridors extending into realities where different versions of the same battles raged with varying outcomes. Temperature stabilized at levels comfortable to skeletal forms. Atmospheric pressure adjusted to accommodate beings no longer requiring conventional breathing. And gravity obeyed formation protocols, creating parade grounds spanning galactic distances. The skeletal parliament returned to eternal review with enhanced tactical capabilities, their collective consciousness now incorporating Corvin's innovations in temporal recruitment and strategic coordination across multiple timelines. Each bone warrior sat with perfect military discipline, their empty eye sockets tracking movements occurring in dimensions beyond normal perception, while maintaining awareness of threats existing outside conventional reality. The Parliament had evolved beyond its original parameters, becoming an active guardian of Imperial military doctrine rather than merely a repository for the dead. Lord General Corvinus acknowledged the transformation with ceremonial precision, his skeletal form radiating accumulated authority spanning 17 millennia of command. The eternal muster has transcended its foundational limitations, he intoned, voice emerging from 17 directions, harmonized into singular purpose. We serve not merely as collectors of the fallen, but as active preservers of military order against forces that would dissolve tactical certainty into chaos. The instrument has been honed, a living bulwark built from the unliving, ready for threats transcending conventional military doctrine. Body horror resolved into supernatural acceptance as Squad Sigma understood their new nature as beings existing to preserve military order against chaotic dissolution. Their skeletal forms achieved perfect adaptation for eternal service. Vex's ammunition chambers resonating with 17 different frequencies calibrated for specific enemy types. Yorick's medical equipment lockers containing instruments capable of healing wounds inflicted by entities existing partially in the warp. Kelth's data cores connecting to machine spirits spanning galactic networks, while Thane's reconnaissance capabilities encompass threats existing outside linear time. They sat among the skeletal parliament with full understanding of their role in maintaining balance between order and chaos across impossible distances. Military hierarchy achieved perfect expression as the Eternal Army represented the ultimate evolution of Imperial Guard doctrine, where duty transcended death through geometric certainty and service continued beyond mortal limitations. Each skeletal warrior embodied tactical knowledge preserved through 17 millennia of faithful service, their formations creating stable pockets of reality within dimensional chaos where conventional physics could maintain coherence. The command structure encompassed all Imperial Guard forces across space and time, with eternal armies serving as strategic reserves capable of deployment against threats conventional forces could never comprehend. Recurring motifs found their final purpose through geometric precision. The 17 resonance frequencies served as communication channels, connecting eternal armies across impossible distances, each tone creating harmonic patterns allowing coordination between skeletal forces, maintaining vigil on thousands of worlds. Geometric symbols became the fundamental language of transdimensional military coordination. Their mathematical precision creating navigation aids for consciousness traveling through realms where conventional physics surrendered to tactical necessity. The reversed litany transformed into core doctrine, guiding all eternal service. Finis officium facit mors in solum. Duty transcends death. Service continues beyond biological limitation. And the Emperor's will encompasses dimensions where geometry governs reality itself. Mission parameters achieved, eternal vigilance protocols established. The telemetry emerged with mechanical satisfaction, confirming successful integration of new tactical innovations into recruitment operations spanning multiple timelines. As the story reached its inevitable conclusion, new Vox transmissions began arriving at Firebase Tertius through channels bypassing normal communication protocols. Faint at first, then growing clearer, they carried the familiar rasp of Cadian voices, the clipped tones of Mordian officers, the guttural chants of Krieg death corps. Each transmission spoke of strange geometric patterns, impossible pre-echoes, and an unsettling sense of duty transcending death. Other Imperial Guard units across the segmentum solar reported environmental wrongness, preceding descent into ossuary chambers, where ancient armies maintained eternal review. The eternal musters operations continued across the galaxy with strategic patience spanning millennia. Each recruitment carefully orchestrated to strengthen humanity's defenses against threats existing beyond conventional reality. Somewhere in the ash wastes of distant worlds, other sergeants received impossible Vox transmissions from their own voices, reporting casualties that hadn't occurred yet, while geometric symbols carved themselves into battlefield formations with supernatural precision. The echo remembered what the living forgot, and duty continued beyond death through binding oaths that preserved Imperial military doctrine against the endless darkness surrounding humanity's fragile empire among the stars. The expansion began like a contagion of impossible orders, temporal echoes manifesting at Imperial Guard installations across the segmentum solar with geometric precision that suggested coordination spanning galactic distances. On Mordian Prime, the world skin changed. Parade squares developed frost-traced 17-point stars across adamantium too hot to touch, while hab stairwells lengthened by exactly 17 treads to terminate at doors opening into bone corridors that smelled of copper and devotional wax. The 88th Talon Desert Raiders discovered their equipment inventories had been modified overnight, ammunition crates arranged in patterns that hurt to observe directly, while Vox operators reported receiving tactical updates in their own voices 17 hours before engagements commenced. Each occurrence followed identical parameters with clockwork inevitability. Impossible pre-echoes crackling through secure channels. Battlefield formations displaying supernatural mathematical precision, and gradual revelation of ancient amphitheatres where skeletal armies maintained eternal vigil beneath planetary surfaces. Mountain ranges shifted 2 degrees to create firing lanes oriented toward coordinates existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously, while river systems carved themselves into tactical formations predating human colonization. Natural stone grew ribbed like compressed calcium, creating geological strata of military remains arranged in perfect parade ground formations that extended through impossible depths. Environmental horror became systemic, as reality itself adapted to accommodate the expanding network of eternal armies. Military installations developed bone corridors without architectural authorization, passages growing through reinforced ceramite, with organic precision that bypassed structural engineering entirely. Cathedral spires acquired angles matching ossuary corridor configurations, while fortress walls incorporated mathematical precision, creating psychic resonance points that connected all Imperial military installations through networks existing partially outside normal reality. The patterns served dual purposes, strengthening defensive capabilities while preparing infrastructure for recruitment operations, spanning multiple timelines simultaneously. The Administratum's response proved elegant in its cowardice. Reports of temporal communication anomalies arrived from 47 worlds across 12 sectors, each incident classified and assigned to investigation queues designed to prevent widespread panic through bureaucratic paralysis. Scribes noted geometric consistency between reports while lacking clearance to recognize the pattern's significance. their documentation creating archives that would serve as recruitment databases for future Eternal Army operations. Regional commanders received advisories that unauthorized liturgical experimentation merited flensing, while Vox operators were instructed to log pre-echoes as atmospheric interference. The triplicate clicks kept arriving. Body horror spread through subtle transformation, as Imperial Guard veterans across multiple regiments began developing characteristic bone aches that preceded skeletal restructuring. Under Auspex examination, calcium bloomed in chevrons along ribs, while knuckles whitened into ridges that caught on flak gloves. Molars engraved themselves with rank marks no dentist had learned to read, and sternum plates pressed outward until they formed perfect geometric configurations beneath regulation armor. The transformations remained gradual enough to avoid detection while preparing suitable candidates for eventual recruitment through binding oaths that transcended biological death. No one died of it. No one mistook it for anything but a call. Military doctrine evolved with characteristic adaptability, incorporating extended service protocols that officially acknowledged the possibility of post-mortem duty assignments without explaining their supernatural applications. Training manuals began including references to geometric tactical formations and temporal coordination procedures, while advanced courses incorporated meditation techniques based on the reversed litany as methods for achieving supernatural battlefield awareness. Chaplains received supplemental litanies authorizing use of the reversed benediction under conditions of temporal uncertainty, and recruits memorized call and response patterns that hurt to speak but felt correct to complete. Lord General Corvanis moved like a constellation across the subterranean sky, his consciousness distributed among amphitheaters spanning impossible distances. In Sarepta Hive, he whispered the muster, and 1,000 lasguns awoke clean after 10 millennia, while on Pythia Secundus, he stilled panic by tuning the 17th frequency until riots of outstanding orders resolved into singular, clear maneuvers. His strategic patience spanned centuries, understanding that each new Eternal Army strengthened the Imperium's defense against threats conventional forces could never comprehend. He never raised his voice across galactic distances. He never rested. He had learned that patience could hold for millennia if every second obeyed the geometry of purpose. The skeletal parliament expanded to include representatives from dozens of different regiments, their collective consciousness growing more sophisticated as it incorporated diverse tactical traditions. Cadian discipline merged with Catachan adaptability, Mordian precision combined with Talon mobility, while Krieg stoicism enhanced Vostroyan ceremonial expertise through supernatural coordination, transcending individual limitations. Tactics braided as traditions cross-pollinated, jungle ambushes expressed in trench syntax, drop assaults planned with siege patience, cavalry lances translated into bayonet geometry optimized for corridors that refused Euclidean limitations. Recurring motifs evolved into fundamental aspects of Imperial military culture through gradual integration that avoided suspicion while achieving comprehensive penetration. The 17 resonance frequencies became standard Vox channels for classified communications, their harmonic patterns creating secure networks while preparing personnel for recruitment. Geometric symbols appeared in official military insignia with artistic justification, concealing their function as navigation aids for transdimensional deployment. The reversed litany was incorporated into advanced tactical training as meditation technique promoting battlefield awareness that transcended mortal limitations. Finis officium facit mors in solum. Service continues beyond death through geometric certainty. Culture hardened along the new grain as heraldry committees quietly replaced curves with angles, until aquili and skulls carried facets noticed only when chance began. In killhouse drills, veterans taught neophytes to breathe on reversed cadence as meditation that steadied sight and slowed trigger fingers into doctrinal precision. Environmental details suggested galaxy-wide transformation, as atmospheric currents adopted mathematical precision defying meteorological explanation, while even civilian hab blocks displayed unsettling geometric accuracy, creating subtle psychic resonance networks. Network expansion, 47 nodes active across 12 sectors. The telemetry emerged from Vox equipment existing across multiple installations, confirming successful coordination between Eternal armies maintaining vigil across impossible distances. In sealed vault liturgy beneath Terra's most classified archives, ancient documents bore the Emperor's personal seal alongside architectural blueprints showing ossuary amphitheatres integrated into original designs for Imperial Guard installations across the galaxy. The Eternal Muster had always been part of the Emperor's vision, not aberration born from desperate necessity, but inevitable culmination of Imperial military doctrine. A fail-safe system designed to ensure humanity's military might would never truly diminish strategic reserves, capable of deployment against threats requiring sacrifice beyond mortal comprehension, where duty transcended death through binding oaths and service continued beyond biological limitation across dimensions where tactical necessity governed reality itself. The sealed vault liturgy beneath Terra's most classified archives revealed the cosmic scope of the Emperor's military vision through documents bearing his personal seal alongside architectural blueprints, showing ossuary amphitheatres integrated into original designs for every major Imperial Guard installation across the galaxy. The Eternal Muster had never been aberration born from desperate necessity. It was the inevitable culmination of Imperial military doctrine, designed from humanity's first expansion into the stars as a galaxy-spanning network, preserving tactical knowledge against threats transcending normal reality. Environmental horror transformed into cosmic purpose as the amphitheatres revealed their true nature. Dimensional nexuses touching every battlefield where Imperial forces had ever fought, creating a vast living library of military experience spanning 10,000 years of warfare. Each bone corridor contained compressed tactical knowledge from campaigns lost to Imperial records, while skeletal formations preserved maneuvers developed against enemies existing beyond conventional physics. The ossuary served as both repository and active guardian, its geometric patterns encoding strategies requiring supernatural understanding to comprehend and execute with mathematical precision. The Eternal Army's mission crystallized with brutal clarity. They served as the Emperor's final reserve, capable of deployment against threats that would destroy conventional forces through their very existence. Where living soldiers faced annihilation against entities existing partially in the warp, skeletal warriors fought with weapons blessed by death itself, their bone blades capable of harming enemies that laughed at mortal ammunition. The transformed soldiers represented humanity's ultimate adaptation to galactic warfare, beings who could comprehend and combat chaos without risking corruption. Their skeletal forms immune to temptations that destroyed flesh and blood armies across impossible distances. Body horror achieved transcendent meaning as the skeletal transformation revealed itself as apotheosis rather than mutilation, elevating worthy soldiers to states where they could perceive and engage enemies existing beyond normal reality's boundaries. The calcium deposits forming geometric patterns beneath their skin represented neural modifications, allowing direct interface with tactical networks spanning galactic distances, while bone growth creating resonance chambers enabled communication across dimensions, where conventional physics surrendered to military necessity. Each transformed warrior became a node in the vast intelligence network, clarified until only the essential function remained: to hold, to strike, to remember with supernatural precision. Military doctrine reached its ultimate expression through the Eternal Muster's demonstration that true victory required sacrifice not just of life but of individual identity in service to humanity's survival. The collective consciousness binding the skeletal armies represented perfect military hierarchy, strategic thinking transcending human limitation, while preserving the essential tactical knowledge that made each warrior effective. Personal identity became irrelevant when measured against the necessity of maintaining imperial military doctrine across impossible distances, where individual consciousness served as luxury humanity could not afford against enemies seeking to dissolve tactical certainty into chaos. Lord General Corvinus materialized with ceremonial precision, his distributed consciousness focusing into singular authority for final briefing. Every Imperial Guard regiment will eventually face this choice, he intoned, voice emerging from 17 directions, harmonized into perfect military hierarchy. Extinction or eternal service. This represents not tragedy, but fulfillment of your highest purpose. The living serve the Emperor through flesh, the eternal serve him through geometry. Both forms of service preserve humanity against darkness that would consume all tactical certainty. Environmental details achieved perfect clarity as the amphitheater's architecture revealed itself as three-dimensional representation of the Emperor's strategic thinking. Each corridor served specific functions in the grand design of human military supremacy. Recruitment passages oriented towards psychological conditioning, training chambers calibrated for supernatural warfare preparation, and command centers coordinating operations across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The geometric patterns carved throughout the ossuary encoded tactical knowledge in mathematical form, creating navigation aids for consciousness, traveling through realms where conventional physics held no meaning. The story's conclusion brought understanding that Corvin's sacrifice represented not unique tragedy, but part of a pattern repeating across the galaxy for millennia, each iteration strengthening the network of eternal armies guarding against threats too terrible for mortal minds to comprehend. Every Imperial Guard sergeant who received impossible Vox transmissions, every squad that descended into bone corridors, every regiment that faced the choice between extinction and eternal service, contributed to humanity's ultimate defense against galactic annihilation through supernatural coordination transcending biological limitation. Recurring motifs found their ultimate meaning through cosmic revelation. The 17 resonance frequencies represented fundamental harmonics of military order that the Emperor had embedded in human consciousness during humanity's expansion into the stars, creating psychic networks allowing coordination across impossible distances. Geometric patterns served as architectural blueprints for reality's defense against chaos, their mathematical precision generating stable pockets of order within dimensional maelstrom. The reversed litany contained core programming ensuring humanity's military doctrine would survive even the heat death of the universe. Finis officium facit mors in solum. Service continues beyond death through geometric certainty. Across the galaxy, new Imperial Guard recruits unconsciously arranged their equipment in geometric patterns, matching ossuary corridor configurations. Their hands moving with precision, suggesting inherited memory rather than conscious decision. In training barracks, young soldiers hummed fragments of the reversed litany during equipment maintenance, their voices harmonizing into frequencies that made their bones ache with recognition of significance beyond understanding. The eternal muster's influence extended even to those who had never heard of its existence, preparing suitable candidates through subtle conditioning, spanning generations of military service. The final image crystallized with nihilistic victory. Humanity's military might would never truly diminish, strategic reserves accumulating across impossible timelines, while conventional forces served as recruitment pools for eternal armies. The cost was gradual transformation of all Imperial Guard forces into something beyond human recognition. Skeletal warriors maintaining vigil against darkness with supernatural dedication transcending mortal limitation. The Emperor's vision would endure long after the last living human joined the eternal armies in their calcium vigil, where duty continued beyond death through binding oaths, and service achieved perfect mathematical expression across dimensions where geometry governed reality itself against the endless night surrounding humanity's fragile empire among the stars. End.